Hey folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board, and tonight we're back with Araki's Manga in Theory and Practice, Chapter 7, All Elements Connect to the Theme. Now, if you remember way back in Chapter 2, there was this diagram, and you can see here that Araki kind of shows themes as this big globe that connects characters, story setting, and is all contained in a bucket that is art. And he said, art is the thing that ties it all together. What are you tying together? Well, character, story, and setting. How are you tying them together? Well, how you want them to tie together is your theme. And that is what Chapter 7 is about. It's a very interesting subject to tackle, and I think people have a lot of strong feelings about themes. Araki defines them as follows. A theme is not something expressed directly, but is something akin to one who rules from the shadows. In other words, a theme is like the puppet master for your manga or your comic or your story in general. It's a thing that people should kind of vaguely know is there, but it's not something that should be popping out of your story. Obviously, it doesn't hit your readers over the head. And if you look at modern comics, a lot of them have very clear-cut, very on-the-nose themes. You look at a comic like Iceman, the theme is about the gay guy, or Miss Marvel, the theme is about the Muslim girl. And that's a very, very on-the-nose theme. It hits you over the head very hard. Or there might be broader themes like acceptance or tolerance. Themes like that are also very common in modern comics. And again, they're fine themes, but they are dealt with such a lack of grace, with such a lack of delicacy, that it's just very off-putting. Your theme ruling from the shadows, your theme serving as puppet master, it will make all of the characters and the story and the setting and the art dance to its tune, but it's going to be very intangible nonetheless. That said, you can't have two puppet masters. Their strings will get tangled. You can't have two commanding officers in a war zone. Every time you try that, it's a disaster, and orders get crisscrossed, and there are misunderstandings. And when your themes aren't clear, when they become muddled, your story can kind of lose some of its emphasis. Araki says, if you're ever in this situation, you need to think long and hard about what you want to draw. In his example, he talks about a manga about soccer. Do you want that manga to be about friendship between the teammates? Or do you want to be about the strategy and techniques of a successful soccer team? Whether that be on the field, in passing and in scoring, or off the field in management of finances and personnel and things like that. That's something you really need to work out. You really need to nail it, or your story is going to go all over the place. It's not going to be very clear. And your theme is not a genre. Like a sports story is a genre, but you can subdivide it. You can have something like boxing. Boxing is a very individualistic sport. It's all about overcoming yourself and the obstacles in front of you. It's all about the training and the techniques. And then you can have, again, a story about something like soccer, where it's very much about, there's the elements of team play. There's interpersonal elements there that are a part of the game. It's not to say that, a story like Rocky doesn't have interpersonal elements, or if you're familiar with the manga or anime Hajime no Ippo, there are interpersonal dynamics in that story, and they're very good and they're very rich. But it's different from the interpersonal dynamics that you see in a story like The Mighty Ducks, or a story like Ice Shield 21, where they're playing hockey or football. Those are those are sports with very strong interpersonal elements. And if you're telling a story about that, there are other aspects, and you have to think about how you want them to play into your theme or not. I mean, you can do a story entirely about, say, a basketball player who's trying to perfect his shooting technique, and you can have his teammates be there, but be less a part of the story. However, if you're going to tell that story, I kind of wonder why would you choose a team sport, but however you want to do it. If the theme becomes muddled, it's a sign that the mangaka's own approach to life is unsteady. Until that is made firm, the mangaka is unable to hold to a persistent theme. This is a very interesting idea from Araki, and I don't know how much I agree with it. I think that it is very difficult to create, and I agree with that. I apologize for the neighbor's dog barking because he's, I don't know, squirrels or something. But having a firm theme is good. But does it have to come from a creator who is firmly rooted? I don't know. I've always been a kind of a steady, even-headed kind of a guy, and so I can't really say whether I have an easier time with theme or not when my head isn't clear. But I know that there are writers who have been in very unsteady places that have still made really good work, or at least work that is regarded as good. So I don't know how true that is. I think it's true that you do have to have discipline as a creator to get in a headspace where you can create. If you're constantly, being distracted and bird dogging after Twitter fights or stuff like that, that is definitely going to throw you off your game. But do you have to have your life sorted? I'm not even sure that's what Araki's saying there. He doesn't expound on it a whole lot. It's an interesting idea. Definitely deserves more thought. Themes reveal the creator's philosophy, and this might tie back into that. That you do have to have a steady frame of reference, an idea of who you are and what your place is in the world in order to clearly articulate a theme. He gives the example of a mangaka who wants to draw erotic work. What is actually erotic will depend on the mangaka. And he says, it could be the type of figure, type of face, how a person acts, how a person looks at you, their attitude. Are they energetic and full of life? Do they project an aura of purity or perhaps an aura of carnality? That kind of thing. Those play into your theme and they come directly from who you are. And to narrow in on that, Araki talks about the theme of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which is his big 8-part epic that's been going and going and going. And the theme of JoJo's is a pain. I don't know how you say that word. A tribute to humanity. It's about the efforts that people have to put in to be successful. He says the characters in JoJo are faced with adversity. They find a solution and forge a path onward by their own abilities and never by some convenient coincidence. No god intervenes to save them, and no magic swords suddenly fall from the sky and into their hands. This is very important. Even when JoJo characters have supernatural powers like Hamon or stands, they have to spend a lot of time refining them. They have to work them out, and they almost always have to apply them in very inventive ways to overcome obstacles. If you're familiar with fights in JoJo's, especially once stands are introduced, they get very cerebral. There's a lot of problem solving, there's a lot of reasoning, there's a lot of testing things out that goes into it. It's all about the work and effort that people need to put in order to be even a little bit successful in life. And this is the theme of JoJo's, but he didn't really have it clearly articulated at first. In fact, he says it was something he put for the inside blurb on the cover of his first graphic novel volume. And that was the first time he articulated that, even though if you read JoJo's, it's there from moment one. And of course, the theme is a little muddled early on. There are a lot of other elements thrown in there. Jonathan Joestar is trying to be a good gentleman, quote unquote. And of course, there are the elements of a battle between good and evil, which is very strong in early JoJo's and tapers off some as the story goes on. Antagonists are still very villainous often, but not in quite the clear-cut way that Dio was, as opposed to Jonathan. Um, he says, when JoJo was just starting to be serialized, my grandfather passed away, and it made me think about how people die, but that some part of us is left behind and to be passed on to the following generations. And of course, if you know JoJo's, it's this multi-generational epic. Legacies are passed from person to person in the family. It covers something like 5 generations of the Joestar line. It's really amazing the way he manages to weave these all together and give you the sense that people have been carrying on this bloodline and their struggles against the dangers of the wider world for over 100 years. It's really great. So that's a part of his theme. And again, it wasn't very clear cut at first. He took some time to work it out. And I find that I do this a lot as I write stories. I put everything down, and then I see, all my ideas on the paper, and then I see what can I connect the dots through, and you start to prune it back, and you get a strong, resonant, thematic story with not so much of the fluff. I mean, fluff is great, it's fun, but as you start to peel it back a little bit, you can tell a stronger, conciser story that resonates more fully because it is all built around these central themes. So he finishes up by saying, without exception, a theme should reflect the creator's life. Again, that's probably going to get some people's hackles up because, again, in mainstream American comics, there is a lot of work that purports to be based on its author's life, to draw from their own experiences. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But from my point of view, what I mostly see is people like Sienna Grace, who are peddling being gay, people like Sana Amanat, who are peddling being Muslim, people like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who are peddling their skin color. And these people are trying to trying to tell stories that they think will sell. They've been told that this is the most important, most interesting, most exciting parts about themselves. They have made the mistake Araki warns against, the mistake of choosing a theme based on what will sell. They believe that this is what people want, and they are trying to get it out there. They think this is what sells. And A, they're wrong. It doesn't sell. But B, I don't think they're really as interested in these parts of themselves as they try to make themselves seem. We know that these virtue signalers frequently don't maintain their standards in private. They are not really interested in them. They just do it because they think it's what sells. And they probably have stories that have nothing to do with these parts of themselves that they think are what sells. But they are so caught up in what the culture, the academia, the political beliefs they have espoused tell them is what sells, that's what they're pushing. And they run into a problem. Araki says, a brilliant person could read this book and use my advice to custom tailor a manga so that every element is optimized for popularity and appeal. And that mangaka might possibly come up with a calculated hit, but that will only work for a short time, maybe 3 years at best. From what I've seen and heard, that's about how long it takes before the intellectual fatigue sets in. And what do we hear, what do we see over and over again when we read these comics like Sienna Grace's Iceman? They seem bored with them. They get tired. They get canceled after a very short period of time. No one seems invested in them. No one is really putting in the kind of effort that leads to really great work. And I think it's because they are doing all this calculation and trying to project this thing they think will sell. None of them are really invested in it, and it comes through. Everyone sees it. On the other hand, if you are drawing from yourself, not so much you and your experiences, but the things you're really interested in. If you are always wanting to get deeper into a topic, then that will come through and your themes will be strong and resonant and fresh. And I notice when I get into a new topic, when I read a book on a subject I don't know much about, or someone tells me about something that seems really cool in science or technology, I'll go and do some reading on it. And I'll start having ideas for stories, and maybe I'll even start writing those ideas down. And the stuff that really sticks with me, I will even finish the story. I have many stories I've started and then realize, I'm not really into this, and I kind of peter out after a couple thousand words. But that feeling of freshness comes through, and it really, really helps your stories resonate. It gives them those themes that will resonate. And I think that's what Araki is talking about when he says a theme should reflect the creator's life. So themes are, they're very hard to pick. That's why I tend to put out the various ideas I have for a story and then prune them back, because I know those ideas all interest me in some way, and the stuff that interests me the most is what I really dig into as I iterate and I go through that story time and again. That may not work for you. That's a personal approach. You may just start telling a story like Araki did and find your theme a little ways in. I'm sure that will work pretty well too. The point is, you do need a theme. And there are a lot of people who work in media and criticism who are not huge fans of theme. And I understand why. A lot of very lazy writers and critics have used theme to try and justify a lot of bad writing. However, I think the pushback against that has been so strong that people kind of have started poo-pooing the theme. They don't think it's important or relevant to the way you tell a story. I think you see a little bit of that in critics like Mahler, who has a great media criticism channel. And he runs into all these people who justify bad writing by bringing up themes, and it's kind of a meme on his channel. But you can't just set them aside. I understand the impulse. Mahler is interested in objectivity as a part of criticism, and that means you have to have things you can quantify and direct support from the story, and that's all good. I agree with all of that. It's very important, but a theme is your puppeteer. He works from the shadows. Your theme's influence should be very subtle and hard to quantify. And in fact, you may have a theme for your story and do everything you can to put it in, and your audience will miss it or misinterpret it. And that's kind of part of the fun of telling a story, seeing how much of it gets through to your audience, and refining that storytelling technique so your themes come through clearer and clearer with each iteration. But I mean, sometimes they're going to go astray. Sometimes you're going to miss the mark, and you just have to accept that. And that doesn't make themes bad. It just means you're not as good as you could be yet. And anyway, I hope that came through clear what I'm trying to say. You need to put the theme in place. You need to really work towards it, because that's where you get the most effective storytelling. But when it doesn't come through clearly, that's on you. And that's just one of the things. It's tough to make a thing and put it out there and then take that criticism, but it's part of what you got to expect. Anyways, I got a lot out of this 5-6 page chapter. I think there's a lot of meat to the idea of themes, but a lot of it, as Araki says, it comes from the creator's philosophy. It's something you have to work out for yourself as you refine your methods for creating. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you have some thoughts on Chapter 7 of Manga in Theory and Practice that you'd like to share, by all means, put them in the comment box down below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.